first I thought it was love. A gentle smile, a thoughtful gesture. A bouquet of daisies placed on the school steps. I thought I was living the beginning of a fairy tale. But looking back now, with 72 years behind me, I realize some fairy tales come with hidden monsters. And some men only know how to love with closed fists. Hello, my dears. My name is Carla, but everyone these days just calls me Grandma Carla. I'm 72 years old, sipping chamomile tea in my little home in Philadelphia. And today, I'm finally ready to share with you a story I kept locked in my heart for more than 4 decades. A story of love, fear, escape, and strength. A story that nearly cost me my life and gave me a reason to live again. Before we begin, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Leave me a comment down below. I love knowing this old voice is echoing across so many homes. And if you're willing, tell me, what does love mean to you? Because by the end of this story, I think you'll see love through a very different lens. Now, if you haven't yet, give this video a little thumbs up and consider subscribing. Not just for me, but for every woman out there who's still silently living the life I once escaped. Together our voices are louder. So come with me now, back to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in the summer of 1978. I was 25, a school teacher, full of dreams, full of hope. And when he looked at me across the room at a school fundraiser and said, "Would you honor me with a dance?" I truly believed I had found my forever. If only I had known what forever would really mean. Harrisburg in the 1970s was a city of brick homes, iron fences, and quiet expectations. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew exactly how a woman was supposed to live. You got married, you had children, you kept the house in order, and most importantly, you kept your voice down, especially if things weren't going well behind closed doors. I was 25 at the time, a schoolteacher at Lincoln Elementary. I loved my work, loved my students, and had dreams bigger than the city skyline. But none of that mattered to many people, not unless I had a ring on my finger. I still remember my mother's words, with love but also a weight. "Carla, darling, a single woman your age makes people talk. You need a husband, a good one, before it's too late." She meant well. Most mothers did. But those words were stitched into the fabric of womanhood back then. Love was less about choice and more about timing. Marriage wasn't just encouraged, it was required. And if the man you married turned out to be cold, cruel, or even violent, you didn't leave. You endured. People didn't use words like abuse or control. Especially not for someone like Mark. A man with a good job, a nice suit, and a smile that charmed half the town couldn't possibly be dangerous. If a woman said otherwise, well, maybe she was just being too emotional. One of my neighbors, Mrs. Allen, once whispered over the fence about her husband's temper. Black eyes hidden behind sunglasses. Excuses about falling down the stairs. When I asked gently if she was okay, she smiled and said, "You know how men are, Carla. Some are just more passionate." And I believed her. Because I had to. Because that's how we all survived. But here's what I've learned since then. Silence is not strength. Silence is what allows pain to grow unnoticed. Speaking up, even when your voice shakes, that is courage. If someone had told me that back then, maybe I would have recognized the signs sooner. Maybe I would have paused when Mark brought me flowers on the school steps. Maybe I would have questioned the way he watched me. Not with admiration, but with ownership. But I didn't. I was a young woman raised to believe that love was something you held onto tightly, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. And so, when Mark extended his hand at that school fundraiser and asked me to dance, I said yes. Not knowing that with that dance, I was stepping into something far darker than I ever imagined. In the beginning, Mark was every woman's dream. He opened car doors, brought me little gifts, asked about my day, and seemed to genuinely care about my students and my work. He made me feel seen, admired, chosen. Our courtship was like something out of a movie. Candlelit dinners. Long walks near the river. And when he got down on one knee at the same restaurant where we had our first date, holding a velvet box with a diamond that sparkled like a tiny star, I thought, this is it. This is the man I prayed for. But fairy tales, real ones, always come with shadows. And sometimes the prince wears a mask. It didn't slip all at once. It started in tiny, almost unnoticeable ways. A comment here. Cold look there. The first time was a week after our wedding. when I wore my favorite red dress for dinner. Mark looked me up and down and said with a strange frown, "That's a little tight, don't you think? You don't want people getting the wrong idea." I laughed it off. I thought he was just being protective. But over time the comments came more often. "Why do you always talk so much? That friend of yours, she seems like a bad influence. Why bother teaching? It barely pays enough for the effort." Little by little I began to shrink. I stopped wearing lipstick. I stopped laughing as loud. I stopped sharing things about my day unless he asked, and even then I chose my words carefully. This is how it happens. Control doesn't always begin with fists. Sometimes it begins with a whisper that slowly tells you, you are too much. You are not enough. You don't belong to yourself anymore. One afternoon after school, I lingered a bit too long chatting with a colleague about a new reading program. When I got home, Mark asked, "So, was he handsome?" It wasn't a joke. It was the first time I felt fear where love used to be. I tell you this, my dears, not to scare you, but to help you see what I didn't. Abuse doesn't always announce itself. It unfolds, quietly, carefully, until you no longer recognize yourself in the mirror. If you ever feel like you're constantly adjusting your light to keep someone else comfortable, take a closer look. That's not love. That's survival. And love should never make you feel like you're slowly disappearing. I wish I had understood that then, but I didn't. Instead, I hoped a baby might bring him back. Back to the sweet man who once danced with me under the stars. I was wrong. People often ask me, "Grandma Carla, was there ever a moment when you knew without a doubt something was truly wrong?" And I always think back to a night in 1981. We had just finished dinner. Nothing fancy, just a quiet meal at home. I had cooked his favorite, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. I thought it went well. But when I stood to start clearing the dishes, Mark looked at me and said, "Did you even bother to brush your hair today? You look like you gave up." That night there were no bruises, no yelling, just a comment, sharp and cruel, that pierced deeper than any slap could. You see, not all abuse leaves marks on the skin. Some wounds are invisible, but they bleed just the same. Emotional abuse is tricky. It doesn't show up on hospital reports. There are no bandages for self-doubt, no stitches for shame. Mark never had to raise his hand in those early years to make me feel small. He did it with silence, with criticism, with the way he made me feel like I was constantly failing as a wife, as a teacher, as a woman. One day, I spent hours decorating the baby's room while Mark was at work. I painted little stars on the walls, folded all the tiny clothes, placed his stuffed animals neatly on the crib. When he came home, I beamed and said, "What do you think?" He looked around and said, "It's fine, I guess. You really had all day for this." No smile, no warmth, just ice. And in that moment my joy disappeared, replaced by a quiet voice inside me saying, "You're not good enough." That's how emotional abuse works. It erodes you. Not all at once, but piece by piece until you question your own worth. It took me years, and a lot of therapy later, to realize the truth. Love should never make you feel afraid to be yourself. Real love lifts, it doesn't reduce. Back then, I didn't know how to name what was happening. There weren't words like gaslighting in everyday language. There weren't hotlines or shelters I knew of. There was just a quiet ache. A feeling that something was off, but no one around me could see it. So I smiled. I hosted. I taught my students with joy and came home to silence. But when I became pregnant with our son, Raphael, I believed desperately that things would get better. That maybe fatherhood would awaken the man I married. For a brief moment it seemed like it did. But emotional wounds left untreated don't heal on their own. And soon those wounds turn physical. People often ask, "Carla, why didn't you leave sooner?" And I understand that question. Truly I do. Seems so obvious from the outside. But when you're in it, when the pain comes dressed in apologies and flowers, leaving is never as simple as packing a bag and walking out the door. Back then I told myself a lot of things. He's just under stress. He's not always like this. He didn't mean to. And the most dangerous lie of all, if I just try harder, he'll change. You see, abuse isn't constant at first. It comes in waves. One day he'd be cold and sharp. The next he'd bring me flowers, whisper promises into my hair, tell me I was his world. And I, like so many women, clung to those good days like they were proof the bad ones weren't real. That maybe I was the problem. That maybe if I just loved him better, he'd go back to the man he was in the beginning. But love doesn't fix people who don't want to change. And over time I realized that hope, when misused, can become a trap. Then came the fear. Not just fear of what he might do to me, but fear of what life would look like without him. Where would I go with a child? How would I support us? What would people say? Back then we didn't talk openly about abuse. There were no shelters in my neighborhood. And when I once told my mother that Mark had screamed at me until I cried, she sighed and said, "Men get angry. Your job is to stay calm and keep peace." So I stayed. Because I thought I had to. Because I didn't believe I deserved more. But here's the truth I wish someone had told me. Staying out of fear isn't loyalty. It's survival. And you don't owe anyone your survival. Dependence, financial, emotional, social, keeps so many women stuck. And I was one of them. Still, something inside me, something small but stubborn, held on. I didn't yet have the strength to leave. But I was slowly waking up to the truth. And sometimes that's the first step. Not leaving. Just realizing that maybe, just maybe, you should. That awakening came to me fully the night my son, my little boy with wide, fearful eyes, looked at me and whispered, "Mom, we need to get out. He's going to kill you." That's when I knew. If I couldn't leave for myself, I had to leave for him. It was a Tuesday night. Nothing special about it. Dinner had been quiet. Raphael, our son, had barely touched his food. Mark had complained that the chicken was dry, then stormed off to the living room with a bottle of beer, leaving his plate untouched. I was in the bathroom trying to cover the swelling under my eye with makeup. He hadn't hit me hard that time. Just a backhand when I forgot to iron his work shirt. But it was enough to leave a mark. And I was getting better at covering them. Too good, maybe. I heard a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, Raphael was standing there, just 8 years old. His eyes wide and solemn in a way no child's eyes should ever be. He looked at me, then at my face. I tried to smile like always, but this time he didn't let me pretend. "Mom," he said quietly, "we need to leave. Dad's going to kill you one day." I froze. It was such a simple sentence. So calmly spoken. But it cracked something wide open inside me. My son, the boy I thought I had been protecting by staying, was not only aware of what was happening, he had already played it out in his head. He had imagined a future where I didn't survive. And the worst part? He believed it was possible. Probable even. That night I didn't argue. I didn't correct him or try to reassure him with the usual "everything's fine, sweetie." Because it wasn't. That was the moment everything shifted. You see, up until then I had endured for the sake of my son. But what I hadn't realized was that my staying wasn't protecting him. It was teaching him. Teaching him that love and pain could live in the same house. That fear was normal. That women stayed silent and men had the power to hurt. And that's when I knew. If I couldn't leave for me, I had to leave for him. Because children don't just watch what we do, they absorb it. And I refused to let my son grow up believing that violence was love, and silence was strength. So I started planning. Quietly. Carefully. I hid money in a coffee tin. Made copies of documents. I waited for the right moment. And when it came, I took Raphael by the hand and we walked away. Into the unknown, into fear, into freedom. It wasn't easy. But it was the bravest thing I've ever done. Leaving wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scene out of a movie with bags flying and tires screeching down the street. It was quiet. Careful. Terrifying. Mark had left on a supposed business trip to Atlantic City, though I later learned he wasn't there for work, but with another woman. And that absence gave me a window. A narrow one. I had been preparing for weeks. Every time I bought groceries, I tucked away a few dollars in a tin can buried beneath the oatmeal. I collected Raphael's birth certificate, our insurance papers, a few photos. I packed one suitcase and hid it beneath old blankets at the back of the closet. Every small act felt like a rebellion, like breathing again just for a moment. The day we left, the sun was out. Ironic, I remember thinking, because everything inside me was trembling. I picked Raphael up early from school, told the secretary it was a family matter. She nodded kindly. I wonder now if she knew or guessed. We didn't go home. We walked straight to the bus station with nothing but that one suitcase and the savings from my oatmeal tin. I remember holding Raphael's hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. He didn't ask many questions. Maybe because deep down he already knew. Our destination was Pittsburgh. My sister Helen lived there. She and I had drifted apart over the years, but I called her the night before and told her everything. She didn't hesitate. "Come," she said. "Don't wait another day." That bus ride felt like forever. I kept expecting Mark to come running through the station, to pull us off the bus, to shout and drag us back. But he didn't. And when the bus finally pulled away from Harrisburg, I looked out the window and realized something. I had done it. After years of fear, shame, and silence, I had left. Not for revenge. Not for drama. But for survival. Leaving is never easy. But staying had become deadly. Here's what I learned. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet breath and a shaky step into the unknown. That night, we slept on Helen's pull-out couch. It was cramped and noisy from the city street below. But it was the first night in years that I slept without fear. I thought the hardest part was over. But in many ways it was just beginning. Because escaping the house is one thing. Escaping what the house did to you, the fear, the shame, the wounds that no one sees, that takes much longer. I wish I could tell you that once we left everything got easier. That the courts welcomed us with open arms. That justice showed up like a warm blanket, wrapping us in protection. But that's not how it happened. Not in 1989. Not for women like me. Mark found out where I was just 2 weeks after we arrived in Pittsburgh. He showed up outside my sister's apartment building, drunk, shouting threats into the night air. Helen called the police. They came eventually. They told him to leave. He spent the night in jail. But by morning he was out again. And angrier. That's when he filed for custody of Raphael. Yes, custody. The same man who had left bruises on my body, who had screamed and cursed and slapped me in front of our child, now claimed I was unstable, unfit, and hysterical. And here's the part that still stings. People listened to him. He was calm in court. Polite. Well-dressed. He had connections in Harrisburg, a cousin in law enforcement, a friend who worked in the courthouse. He told them I had run away without warning. That I was emotional. That I had poisoned Raphael against him. And me? I was nervous. Shaking. Overwhelmed by the process. I didn't know how to speak the language of lawyers in courtrooms. All I had was the truth. And a few faded photos of my bruises. If it weren't for Dr. Netter, an elderly lawyer my sister knew, I don't know what would have happened. He looked at me and said, "Carla, I've seen this story before. You're not crazy. You're not unstable. You're a mother trying to protect her child. We'll fight." And we did. Raphael, only 8 at the time, had to speak with social workers and psychologists. He had to say out loud what he had seen, what he had heard. And that broke my heart. But that's what turned the tide. The judge listened. Witnesses came forward. Neighbors who had heard the shouting, teachers who had noticed the bruises, the school counselor who had seen Raphael's drawings. And slowly the picture came into focus. Still, it took nearly a year. Because the system doesn't always protect survivors. Sometimes it doubts them first. That's the lesson I learned. Justice is not automatic. It's something you have to fight for. And the fight is often slow and lonely and unfair. But we won. I was granted full custody. Mark was allowed supervised visits, which in the end he never even showed up for. But even as the papers were signed, I knew I still had a long way to go. Because legal freedom is one thing. Emotional freedom is another. When the judge finally granted me full custody of Raphael, I thought I would feel triumphant. I expected relief, maybe joy. But what I felt more than anything was exhaustion. We had escaped. We were safe. But safety doesn't erase trauma. And no legal ruling could rebuild what years of abuse had torn down inside me. We started over in a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Pittsburgh. It was small, so small that Raphael and I shared a bed for almost a year. But it was ours. And more importantly, it was quiet. No shouting. No slammed doors. No footsteps filled with rage. I got a part-time job at a local elementary school, first as a substitute, then gradually as a full-time teacher. I hadn't stood in front of a classroom in nearly 2 years. I was scared I had lost that part of myself. But the children, they brought me back to life little by little. Their curiosity, their laughter, their innocence. It reminded me that not everything had to hurt. Still, healing didn't happen all at once. There were nights I couldn't sleep. Mornings when I'd catch myself flinching at sudden sounds. I struggled with guilt. Guilt for staying so long. Guilt for exposing Raphael to any of it. Guilt for still, sometimes, missing the idea of the man Mark once pretended to be. That's when I found therapy. I walked into my first session shaking. I was embarrassed. Ashamed. I didn't even know how to start. But my therapist, Dr. Elizabeth, looked at me and said something I never forgot. You've already done the hardest part. You survived. Now let's work on helping you live. And so we began. Week by week, I unpacked the things I had buried for years. The things I had never told anyone. The ways I had learned to make myself small, quiet, invisible. And slowly something shifted. I began to see Carla again, not just the survivor, the mother, the teacher, but me. Raphael changed too. He started martial arts, which helped him build confidence. He made friends. His drawings turned from storm clouds and broken houses to trees, rivers, and superheroes. That's how I knew we were healing. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to laugh again. Enough to plan for tomorrow. Enough to believe we deserved peace. Here's what I learned. Recovery is not about going back to who you were before. It's about learning to love who you are now, scars and all. But just when I thought we had found our new normal, something unexpected began to happen inside me. A small voice. Quiet thought. A seed of something bigger. What if I could help other women find this peace too? For a long time I thought strength looked like silence. Holding it all in. Smiling through the pain. Surviving without ever asking for help. But in the years after escaping Mark, something inside me began to shift. Not all at once, healing isn't that kind. But slowly, steadily, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was growing. And more than that, I wanted to reach back and help someone else climb out of the darkness I knew too well. It started small. A woman at the school, another teacher, quietly mentioned she was having trouble at home. Her eyes avoided mine, but her voice trembled when she said, "It's not always like this. He's just stressed. I probably push him too much." And in her words I heard echoes of my own past. So I stayed late after class. I sat with her. I listened. And then gently I told her a little bit of my story. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough for her to know she wasn't crazy. She wasn't weak. And she wasn't alone. That conversation sparked something in me. Maybe all of this, everything I had lived through, wasn't just pain. Maybe it had a purpose. I started volunteering at a small local women's center on Saturdays. I folded clothes, helped organize donated food, and when I was ready, I started sharing more of my story. And every time I did, something amazing happened. Women opened up. They cried. They hugged me. And more than once, someone whispered, "If you could survive that, maybe I can too." That's when I understood. The very thing I thought had broken me had actually built me into someone stronger, more compassionate, more determined than I ever imagined. Not because trauma is some kind of gift. It isn't. But because what we do with it, how we rise from it, can become our greatest strength. Here's the truth I discovered. Your scars don't make you damaged, they make you real. And sometimes they become maps for others trying to find their way out. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't trying to start anything big. But the more I helped, the more I realized how many women were still trapped. Not just in abusive homes, but in silence, shame, and fear. And slowly, that small voice inside me grew louder. What if we built something bigger? Something lasting? A place where women could go not just to survive, but to truly start over? That was the seed. And the next chapter was about turning that seed into something real. I thought I had put the past behind me. By 2003, Raphael was grown, I was retired, and life had finally settled into something peaceful. I had a small home in the Highland neighborhood of Harrisburg, far from the house I had once shared with Mark. I had my garden, my books, and my volunteer work. I wasn't afraid anymore. Or at least I thought I wasn't. Then one afternoon at the grocery store, I ran into an old neighbor. She leaned in and whispered, "Did you hear? Mark's back in town. Staying with his brother on Oak Street. He's very sick, liver problems, they say." I smiled politely, nodded, paid for my groceries. But inside something cold settled in my chest. First I tried to ignore it. He's sick, I told myself. He won't bother me. It's been over a decade. But abusers don't always let go. Even when they have nothing left to hold on to. Weeks passed without incident. I let my guard down again. Until one night in June. I was grading some reading worksheets from a tutoring session. It was quiet, peaceful, and then a sound. A soft creak. Crack of glass. I froze. At first I thought it was the cat I'd been feeding in the backyard. But when I opened the door, no cat. Just silence. And something in the air, something off. I locked the door and went back inside. 10 minutes later I heard footsteps. In the kitchen. My heart dropped. Before I could move, the bedroom door swung open. It was him. Older. Thinner. His skin yellowed from disease. But his eyes, they were the same. And they were filled with rage. Found you, he slurred. You thought you could run forever? I won't recount all the details here. Some parts are too painful. But I'll say this. He came to hurt me. He came to finish what he had started years ago. And I fought. With everything I had. Because I wasn't that same woman anymore. When he tried to pin me down, I reached for the heavy ceramic lamp on my nightstand. The one I'd bought at a church fair. I swung it hard. He fell bleeding. But even then he came at me again. Only when I used the scissors, the ones I'd been using to prep a student's paper project, did he finally fall for good. Called 911. I trembled as I waited for the police. And I watched as the man who had once vowed to love me, took his final breath on my bedroom floor. Here's what I know now. Sometimes, even when we've healed, we must still face what once broke us. But healing doesn't mean we are weak. It means we're ready to survive differently. I thought it was over. But there was still one more trial left. This time not just emotional but in court. The police arrived within minutes. The scene was chaos. Flashing lights, paramedics, voices on radios, questions I could barely process. Mark lay motionless on the floor. And I sat in the corner of my bedroom, still holding the scissors, my hands shaking uncontrollably. They asked me what happened. I tried to speak, but the words came in pieces. They took me to the station. There, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, I gave my statement. I had defended myself. That much was clear to me. But trauma has a way of making you doubt your own reality. What if they don't believe me? What if they think I planned this? I was charged with involuntary manslaughter pending investigation. Even after everything, after years of being the victim, here I was again on trial. Only this time the world had changed. And thankfully so had the system. In the weeks that followed, I had to recount my story over and over. The emotional abuse, the physical attacks, the custody battle, the break-in, and of course the night of the final confrontation. But this time something was different. People believed me. Detectives reviewed the 911 call. They heard the panic in my voice. Crime scene investigators found the broken window Mark had entered through. And the most powerful evidence? My past. Old court documents. Medical records. Raphael's own written testimony from years ago. They painted a picture that could no longer be ignored. When the trial came, the courtroom felt heavy with history. Mark's brother showed up, cold-eyed and bitter. But so did my sister Helen, a few women from the shelter I had once volunteered at, and even some of my former students, now grown, who sat in the back row quietly offering their presence as strength. When I took the stand, I was afraid. But I remembered something Dr. Elizabeth once told me. Speak your truth. You've already survived it. Now just tell it. So I did. I told the jury everything. Not just about the night he broke in, but the lifetime of fear that came before it. The system listened. And finally, after decades of being silenced, doubted, minimized, the verdict came. Not guilty. Self-defense. I wept. Not for Mark. Not for the years lost. But because for the first time in my life I had been seen. Truly seen. Not as a hysterical woman. Not as a victim. But as a survivor. As a mother. As a fighter. Here's the lesson I carry from that courtroom. Justice is slow, but it can arrive. And when it does, even late, it matters. But even as the courtroom emptied and the chapter seemed to close, I knew. There was still one thing left to do. Because survival had brought me here. But it was time now to build something for others. Healing gave me back my life. But helping others, that gave my life meaning. After the trial, after the years of fear in courtrooms and survival, I had a choice. I could quietly retreat into peace. No one would have blamed me for that. But deep inside, I knew my story wasn't just mine anymore. Too many women were still trapped, still hiding, still waiting for permission to speak their truth. So I gave that permission, not through grand speeches or television interviews, but through something much simpler, a safe place. In 2006, with a modest grant, a lot of prayer, and the support of the women I had walked beside in shelters and courtrooms, I opened the Oak Haven Center, a community space for women starting over after abuse. It wasn't fancy, just a repurposed house on the edge of town. But it had warm lights, open arms, and most importantly, no judgment. We offered workshops, legal referrals, job skills training, group counseling, and shared meals. Some days it was just a quiet room where someone could cry without being told to stop. And slowly, story by story, woman by woman, it grew. One of the first women we helped was Mia, a young mother with 2 children and a bruise hidden behind her scarf. She came in trembling, unsure whether to speak. We didn't push her. We just sat with her. And over time she bloomed. Now, Mia is the director of that same center. That's what healing does. It multiplies. Helping others doesn't erase your own pain, but it transforms it. It turns wounds into wisdom, fear into fire, shame into strength. And through that work, I began to truly understand something that took me decades to learn. You are not defined by what broke you, you are defined by how you rise. People began calling me a leader, a founder, a mentor, but I still just see myself as Carla, a woman who once didn't believe she had a voice, now holding the mic out for someone else. Some days I still walk through the center with tears in my eyes, not from sadness but from awe. Awe at the strength of these women. Awe that something built from so much pain could become a house filled with light. And now as I get older and slower, I've started writing it all down. Not just for the women who came after me, but for my granddaughter. Because one day, she'll ask why Grandma Carla spent her life helping strangers. And I'll tell her, they weren't strangers. They were me. Just at different moments in time. If you're listening to this story right now, maybe while folding laundry, sitting in your car, or quietly in bed after everyone else has fallen asleep, and you feel a lump rising in your throat because something in this story sounds familiar, this part is for you. I want you to know you are not alone. Not now. Not ever. I know what it feels like to smile when your world is falling apart. To laugh at the dinner table while holding back tears. To apologize for things that were never your fault just to keep the peace. I know what it's like to hide bruises, not just on your body but on your heart. To wonder if anyone would believe you. To worry you're too broken, or too weak, or too late. Let me say this plainly. There is nothing wrong with you. There is something wrong with the way you've been treated. And you deserve more. You deserve love that doesn't hurt. You deserve safety, peace, and mornings without fear. You deserve to laugh without checking the room first. To speak without rehearsing. To rest without guilt. I say this not just as someone who has lived through abuse, but as someone who came out the other side. Yes, it took years. Yes, I had setbacks. Yes, there were nights I almost went back. But I didn't. And you don't have to either. There are women just like you all across this world who've walked through fire and made it out whole. Not untouched, no. But whole. And stronger. You are not weak because you stayed. You are not crazy because you doubted. You are not a failure because you hoped it would change. You are human. And if you're still in it, if you're still surviving, that means your strength has not left you. It's still there. Quiet maybe, but steady. Reach for help. Even if it's messy. Even if you don't know what to say. Call the hotline. Tell a friend. Walk into the shelter. Or whisper your truth into a journal just to hear your own voice again. Your story is not over. It is just beginning. And one day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but one day you will look back at this chapter not with shame but with pride. 'Cause you didn't just survive. You chose yourself. That choice, even in its smallest form, is how everything changes. If you had told the 24-year-old version of me, the one sitting quietly by the window, hoping the yelling would stop, that one day I would be here, speaking out, helping others, living in peace, I don't think she would have believed you. Back then, survival was the only goal. Healing wasn't even a concept I understood. But time, grace, and the love of a few kind souls changed everything. Today my home is filled with sunlight and laughter. Raphael is grown now, a father himself. Watching him be gentle with his children, patient, kind, present, fills me with a kind of healing I never expected. The cycle ended with me. And that is the legacy I'm most proud of. Oak Haven Center is still running. Every time I walk through those doors and see women sharing coffee and stories, some smiling, some still trembling, I am reminded that this work is not about fixing people. It's about creating space where healing can begin. You see, healing is not about erasing what happened. It's about reclaiming your voice in the story. It's saying, yes, this happened, but it is not who I am. It is not all I am. My scars don't define me, but they do remind me. They remind me of how far I've come, of what I've survived, of the woman I chose to become when everything in me wanted to give up. And if there's one thing I hope this story has shown you, it's this. Strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to keep going, to ask for help, to protect your child, to walk away with nothing but your name. That is power. That is bravery. That is what turns pain into purpose. As I sit here today, a grandmother, a teacher, a survivor, I no longer carry shame. I carry stories. Stories of women who found their way out. Stories of second chances. Stories of beginnings that came long after everyone thought the story was over. This isn't just my legacy. It belongs to every woman who refused to stay silent. To every survivor who whispered, "Me too," even when her voice shook. To every daughter who grows up knowing that love should never come with fear. And to you, dear listener, if you've made it to the end of this story, maybe you carry your own version of it too. So know this, you are not alone. You never were. And your future, no matter how broken today may feel, is still waiting, still open, still yours to write. Thank you for walking with me through these chapters. Now it's your turn to write the next one. With love, Grandma Carla.